Hi, I'm Lisa Anderson, host of Supply Chain Chats, and I'm here today with John Tulac, who's an international business attorney and a global extraordinaire. And so we're going to be talking about China. It's definitely a hot topic in supply chain circles. John, where would you like to begin on the topic of China?
Well, I think we should talk about how China isn't so much in the news on the front page because everybody's focused on what's going on elsewhere in the world in terms of our tariff threats to our friends to the north and south and the attempts to negotiate a peace in the Ukraine-Russian war. But China is always top of mind in my book because it is the more important global power. Certainly far more important than Russia. Russia could be more meddlesome in the short term, but in the long term, it's China we have to deal with. And it's just not been commanding as much attention as late. And that's a mistake because China is really important.
I mean, it's concerning to me that Russia has taken up so much time because I don't know if it's GDP or however you want to look at it, but to your point, they have nowhere near the influence. They do happen to have some nuclear weapons, so that's not a good thing. But they're nowhere near as concerning as China.
Right. And of course, our atomic scientists have set the nuclear clock to 5 seconds to midnight, the closest to, Armageddon that we've ever had. I worry about it. I think every concerned person on the planet has to be concerned about nuclear weapons. But here's something I think is positive. I think that Trump's recent out of the blue suggestion, let's all reduce our nuclear arms by 50%, which didn't get a whole lot of attention.
Yeah.
All the other stuff going on. But I know that China was receptive to that.
Oh, really? That's
nuclear weapons are expensive. China has hidden it as well as it could, but our satellites pick up how much activity there's been in the last few years, creating new missile silos, creating hidden bases. There's been a lot of military buildup on that front. But everybody who has a brain knows how dangerous nuclear weapons are and the risk that there can be an incident, something that triggers a launch improperly, a reaction improperly. And we had a near miss with, fortunately, a Russian, relatively low-level officer figuring out this is an error. This is not an attack. And so that's something that I think should appeal to Putin as well when you've got a Russian economy in shambles and with Xi trying to work on the internal problems in China. This is something that all the powers in the world could get behind. Except for Fat Boy in North Korea.
Yeah, well, he's
a hopeless case.
He's hopeless, yes.
He's hopeless. But the Chinese are more worried about him with his finger on a red button than anybody else. And of course, there's Iran. So this is one area where I could see some positive development with cooling off the tension between China and the United States. So
that would be encouraging.
It doesn't get lost.
That is a good. I'm glad you brought that up because there's so many concerning things, but that would be a good step forward. And to your point, if we can see that they're actually doing less, building less of them, so that we can trust that that's actually happening, that would be good for everyone. So that could be a good step forward. Now, one of the things that, with my knowledge of China, and I know you have so much more, and you used to train judges from China and just have a lot of experience with the whole topic. But I know that China produces 60% of the computer chips for the world, and Taiwan produces 90% of the advanced computer chips, which are clearly needed for AI. And then also China produces the rare minerals needed for, everything, really. It's really not well known how important the natural resources and rare minerals are to everything. They've had a Belt and Road initiative going on where they've been buying up areas of the world that give them strategic advantages. So that seems like, they've had the long-term view here. As you've told me before, anything that goes through a Chinese server, they can, which is pretty much anything, if you're doing business with them, pretty much they can see. So I don't know, it adds up to a worrisome equation. What do you think about all that? And what should clients be doing if they're manufacturing in China?
Let's pile on a few more horrible things. What they have an active cadre of people who know how to hack into
Good point.
systems. We're seeing economic warfare and cyber warfare as very, very worrisome things. And China has a seriously strong cyber warfare capability. The advantage is always on the hackers. They can eventually break any system and cause harm. And then your defense has to catch up. You learn by the latest, greatest, bestest kind of hack kind of thing. And so that is worrisome, and stuff that we should have done years ago, like hardening our grid against cyber attack that doesn't cost all that much money. We still haven't been warning about this for decades.
Totally concerning, especially in places like California. I mean, goodness gracious.
Yeah. Well, our grid could fail here simply because it's so old and it's got two choke points. Either one goes down, it's going to take the entire Western United States with it. And again, we've known about this for a long, long time. So we've also known China has a stranglehold right now on us in terms of some rare earths and other strategic metals, in terms of 90% plus of our pharmaceuticals and other things which are vital to our defense and our health and safety. No one who understands supply chain would say, yeah, be sole source supplier, be sole source reliant on that supplier. And especially when that supplier isn't in a country that's our best friend anymore by any means. So
by any means.
You and I both preach that constantly. You must diversify. You have to be resilient. You have to have higher costs, perhaps, as a price that you should willingly pay, and a consumer should willingly pay to know I'm always going to get my medication, my strategic minerals. I'm always going to get my components to build the jet fighter that I need for national defense. And we've been way too slow in doing that. Companies that are heavily invested in China, I know it's expensive to move, but you need to diversify.
Yeah.
The other thing is China's got internal problems that are really severe. In any country,
I've heard about that, John. Like how? I mean, I know that they try to keep things out of the news, if you will, but things aren't great over there. Is that right?
Right. Well, they not only keep things out of the news by censoring, they outright lie. So there's no.
That'll do it.
I don't pull any punches on this sort of thing. They haven't grown by 5% the last couple of years. They were lucky if they got 2%. They are fudging data or simply not reporting data because they're so embarrassed about how China's actual economic post-COVID has been. The economic performance has been dismal. They're going to age out their growth because they don't have enough young people to replace an aging population, and that is expensive. They haven't turned their production internally to take care of their own people's needs. Their own people know it, so they sit on their savings and don't consume, where that would otherwise be a natural progression. And it's one of the most polluted countries on earth. They have a lack of clean drinking water. 40% of their arable land is polluted and has to be remediated if it's ever going to go back into agricultural production, which, by the way, is an opportunity for the United States to be able to go in and do that. But in order to do that, you need a friendly environment for that.
Right.
We'll go to China, and then you get to watch everything we do, and everything in on the servers you can just steal.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, not going there.
Definitely not acceptable. Actually, you bring up a good point. So I know that they had I don't know what it is, but a limit on the number of children, right, in the past.
Right.
And are you saying that that's catching up to them now because their population they have a large population, but it's aging out. Is that what you're saying?
It's aging out. And because of the one-child policy, it's created this problem. And although they've lifted that policy, there are several things that are going to prevent the Chinese from doing anything about it in the short term. One is there are many more men than women because under the one-child policy, if you knew you were having a girl, sorry to say this out loud, but they aborted because males were more favored. You have a population of young men who will never be able to marry.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. Secondly, young people, male and female, are graduating with degrees and there's no gainful employment for them. And she's response was, go get your hands dirty. Work at some lesser job, which didn't sit well after you've gotten your degree. And then what you've had is literally chunks of the workforce tuning out. It's like we lie flat. The slang term is lie flat. We choose not to do anything.
So is that what they're doing?
Yeah, part of it's because they become so discouraged about lack of the proper work that they play games. So that's why there's a policy in China about limiting the number of hours to play video games.
It doesn't help if they don't start doing something productive, to your point.
Exactly.
It's sort of like that win-win that we were talking about earlier, is you have to have some incentive to do something. It sounds like you're saying that President of China has been focused on the rest of the world, but not necessarily his own people.
The focus internally has been all wrong. He doubles down on support for the state-owned enterprises. He has and is continuing to throw money into unnecessary infrastructure. You have enough empty apartments in China to house the entire population of Germany.
Wow, that's
I don't know if that's
extreme of a fact,
but it's pretty much a bunch of empty cities when you add up all the empty units.
And I know part of it was that they were doing this so they could keep workers busy, right? Creating buildings, I guess. But you run out at a certain point, right? So I don't know. It sounds like a problem, but unfortunately it makes it so that he's more willing to take these risks, it seems, which is concerning.
Well, that's right in two respects. One is he has to stop military spending. And so the buildup of the Chinese Navy in particular, very worrisome. Increased capabilities of their Air Force, thanks to stealing our technology. We're essentially fighting images of ourselves if we ever had to do that. And we're nowhere near being able to catch up with our defense spending because of the way we currently allocate resources. Yeah. And that's why I keep telling people that we are in the most dangerous period in world history. The next 5 to 10 years are going to be tough because China realizes that it's in the next few years going to be as strong as it's ever going to be, and it's going to move backwards. And if you can't then surpass your key rival, the United States, then you try to bring your key rival down. That's the Thucydides trap. And that's what we should be working on both sides of the Pacific to avoid, because it'll be catastrophic for both countries.
For sure. So it really sounds like, well, one is we should be diversifying our supply chains, for sure. We should be leery, for sure, I would think, about anything that we produce in China. We really should be diversifying, bringing production back to Mexico, which is we still have an agreement with, and it's closer and friendlier. They're not communist. So it seems like we should be pursuing those strategies and with some urgency. Is that correct?
Absolutely right. Again, I wouldn't say to anybody right now, you just have to get out of China. What I say to people now is you need to be prepared to get out of China. That may mean that if you haven't done other plans, and no matter how painful this may be, you may need to abandon your China interests on very short notice, which means you don't have a plan in place. That's going to be even more expensive than painful. Look what happened when the Shah fled the country. Iran collapsed into a very hostile government very quickly. And French and US and English companies had to scramble to get people out of the country rather than risk them there, and abandon a whole lot of things because of the ensuing chaos. That could happen with China. And so today, if you're going to stay in China, I would negotiate a lot harder. Like, you want me to stay, then this is what I need. And yeah, I think
Yeah, for sure. And definitely put yourself in a good negotiating position by no means would I recommend it for anyone to be 100% reliant on China, or you just will go down with the ship. It seems like if you want to have a long-term business and supply chain, you're going to have to diversify. Doesn't mean you have to get out of China, especially if you're using, your China location to support Asia, perhaps, or something like that. It sounds like is what you're saying.
exactly. And of course, there are ways that you can mitigate the costs. So let's say that you're a smaller company. You're not General Motors, but you spent a couple $1,000,000 with tooling, creating the molds and creating the tooling, and you've got it with a manufacturer in China. You can't go right down to your friendly bank and get another $2 million necessarily. But if you decide I really need to leave China, you can negotiate a sale of that equipment to your Chinese manufacturer, give them a license agreement, take a royalty, take your upfront sale, whatever you get for that equipment, and go to your friendly bank and say, I've got $1 million of the $2 million. And
Right.
I want to set up a new facility in Vietnam. And it doesn't mean you completely abandon what you've got in China. You just spread your risk out. So
Yeah.
there are ways to mitigate even if you don't have the most resources, but you're smaller, so you have to be smarter and nimbler if you're
Yeah.
not cheating.
I completely agree. I mean, I think to summarize our segment on China, it seems like you can't just leave things to chance any longer. You're gonna have to start taking action. You have to diversify, and you really need to be innovative and be more creative, thinking about solutions. It's gonna add some cost. It depends. I mean, the problem is you're gonna have to consider the investments you've made in China as sunk costs, if you will. For example, Mexico's labor rate is not worse than China. It's not. It's even better. So it depends. If you have a product that can be automated, you could put it in the US and you'll probably, be in much better shape. You'll avoid tariffs and other things. So you just have to be smart and forward thinking. Does that sound like a reasonable conclusion?
Sounds like a good foundation to me, Lisa.
All right. Well, we'll be back in the future for another segment on China.